The devils are the lawful evil fiends of the D&D multiverse. They despise chaos and are at an eternal war with the chaotic evil demons of the abyss. Their goal is to corrupt mortals so that their souls are damned to hell and can be transformed into more devils to fill the armies of hell which fight in the blood war. They are lawful in nature and thus follow a strict hierarchy. It is the dreams of all devils to be promoted and rise higher within their ranks. If they impress their superiors by claiming mortal souls or fighting demons well, they can be promoted to the next station within the infernal hierarchy. They must ensure not to impress their superiors too well, however, because then they might be seen as a threat, one that might sabotage their boss so that they may take its place. They are just as much evil as they are lawful. First, let's answer the question, how does a soul become a devil? Well, first, we must look at the types of souls that get sent to hell. Normally, your soul goes to whatever domain the god you worshipped in life resides in. Therefore, if you worshipped a god that lives in hell, such as Set or Tiamat, you would go to their domain and take whatever twisted form your god wanted you in, but not necessarily become a devil. If you did not worship a particular deity, but are lawful evil in alignment, or you gave your soul to a devil as part of a contract, you would then eventually become a lemur and work your way up the infernal hierarchy. The other way you go to hell, however, this is dependent on a specific origin story for Asmodeus, which there are multiple of. This particular one is found in the 2nd edition supplement, Guide to Hell. In this version of the myth, if you believe in no gods, rejecting the power of divinity, you go to hell. You do not become a devil or become a petitioner of a deity, though. Instead, you are consumed by Asmodeus, your soul completely destroyed, so that he may heal from his battle with Jazirian. Now, in Realm Space, the crystal sphere that the planet Toril resides in, also known as the Forgotten Realms campaign setting, things work slightly differently. When you die, you do not immediately go to the afterlife you belong to. Your soul first travels to the Fugue plane, where you are judged by Kelemvor. While waiting to be judged, devils are allowed to bargain with the souls, playing on their fears and doubts to get them to agree that becoming a lemur with a chance for promotion was a better option than their suspected fate. Strong or crafty souls might negotiate a deal that reduced their time as a lemur or bestow a boon or punishment on those they left behind. Technically, this falls in the making a pact with the devil category, but I think it's worth mentioning separately. If you did not worship a god, you were put into the Wall of the Faithless. Now, this was exceptionally rare. Even if you didn't pray to any one specific deity, you probably unwittingly worshipped one. If you appreciated art and beauty, you were worshipping Sune. If you farmed crops, you were worshipping Shantia. Then, whichever one was the most worshipped in your life was where you would be judged to go. So, being faithless meant you actively rejected the gods, believing them not to be divine at all. Obviously, this contradicts the World Serpent origin story for Asmodeus that I previously spoke of, since in that one, faithless go to hell instead of the wall. It's also unclear if the wall even exists anymore in the current iteration of the Forgotten Realms. It was stated in a novel that it was replaced with a mirrored wall, but then later in the Sword Coast Adventures guide released for 5th edition, it mentions the Wall of Faithless again, as if it's still around and the book wasn't canon. But then later they released an errata for the Sword Coast Adventures guide that completely erased that sentence from the book, so it's very unclear if the Wall of Faithless even exists. Now, the petitioners that worship the deity residing in Beator are separate from the rest that become devils. They go to the god they worshipped and do not become a lemur and work up the hierarchy. It is said that they are not there to be punished on page 10 of the Beator pamphlet of the Plains of Law box set, but in the Fires of Dis module, which is also from 2nd edition, it has groups of lemurs, Nuparibos, and non-fiend petitioners, which are represented as human shade stat blocks, being forced to build and tear down structures made out of hot iron with their bare hands as a form of punishment. So in this instance, the petitioners of gods are being punished and are not in the realm of their god. I'm not exactly sure what circumstances this would happen, and I couldn't really find an explanation other than one sentence saying that occasionally petitioners wander away from their god's domain. So maybe these ones just wandered into Dis and Dispater decided to put them to work in the labor camps, but it's not really explicitly stated. Now, let's look at the process of becoming a lemur. This is something that I was very interested in, and this is actually the reason that this entire video series was created, is because I was looking to the answer to this question, and I found a lot of different answers in different editions, so I decided to do an entire series showcasing the differences in lore between editions. So let's look at the process of becoming a devil from a soul. In 2nd edition, the book Guide to Hell says that most souls that are born in hell are reborn as larvae, and then are tortured and abused constantly by the Batizu. Eventually, a process was developed that could transform the larva into lemures. I have no idea if torture is part of the process or even necessary, or if they were just kind of doing it for fun. On page 12 of Faces of Evil the Fiends, it says that you arrive as a larva. Then it is survival of the fittest as they try to survive the harsh conditions, predators, and each other. Batizu find the hardiest larva, which is only about 12 in every 100,000, and mold them into lemures. There's no detail given on what this molding entails or if it involves torture. On page 10 of the Beator pamphlet of the Plains of Law box set, it says only the most evil mortals achieve status of lemur, those that were selfish, proud, and ambitious, but not evil enough to make the initial cut as lemures, find themselves petitioners in the form of larvae, and must be sold to Batizu or Tanari before being promoted to lemur or imp. So that seems to imply that you could immediately start off as a lemur when you arrive in hell, and only some start off as larvae, but the previous sources, Guide to Hell and Faces of Evil, seem to imply that you always start off as a larva and must be turned into a lemure. Always 100% of the time. Also, just a little side note, it says Batizu or Tanari, so devils or demons, before being promoted to lemures or imp. Which is a weird way to word that, because that sort of implies that imps are demons, but they're not. But in 1st and 2nd edition, it was sort of ambiguous if imps were considered devils or not, but I'll get to that later. In 3rd edition, the book Fiendish Codex 2, Tyrants of the Nine Hells, gives us the most detail on this process, and answered a lot of questions that I personally had. So, a soul first arrives on the blood-soaked rocks protruding from the river Styx, called the Shells of Despond, which is located on Avernus, the first layer of hell. These souls resemble, quote, bedraggled, slightly rubbery versions of their former selves. They still bear any wounds and infirmities they suffered during their last moments of life. Those that were ambulatory immediately before death can still move around under their own steam, but the maimed and disabled remain so. These crude physical forms render the souls vulnerable to the astoundingly varied array of torture techniques awaiting them in the chambers of the damned, end quote. These souls, or petitioners, were called soul shells in this book. So it appears that larvae are not naturally formed in the Nine Hells in 3rd edition. That instead you are a soul shell, which still resembles close to your mortal form, but not quite. Bearded devils pull boats to these islands to collect the souls and take them to the lair they belong to. Most souls wind up in hell because they were corrupted by a specific devil, although many times indirectly. Even if they didn't make a pact, they might be evil because the culture they come from incentivizes that kind of behavior. A culture that was corrupted to that line of thinking by a king that had an imp whispering in his ear 300 years ago. Point is, even if extremely indirect, almost all souls are credited to a devil, and therefore credited to the archdevil that devil works for. Devils with an intelligence of 6 or higher can see a mark on each petitioner that signifies both the devil responsible for its damnation and the lord it was serving at the time of its decisive corruption. The souls are then taken to torture stations to their respective lairs, although many archdukes outsource their torture to Jangling Heiter on Minoros. There, an Amnizu records the name of the devil who was responsible for the soul, and an Erinyes sends back reports of the lords telling them who their top soul harvesters are, similar to the top scares board in Monsters Incorporated. The souls are horribly tortured for an unknown amount of time, quote, peeling away every last iota of the petitioner's individuality. The process releases magical energy, which flows to the local lord as specified in the Pact Primeval. Torture teams composed of chain-slinging chitons and masked pain devils mercilessly terrorize and mutilate the souls of the damned until every scintilla of extractable magic has been wrung from them. After the last glimmer of humanity has been violently torn from a soul shell's physical form, the quivering husk that remains is dropped into a processing crater, such as Avernus's dreaded maggot pit. There, it quickly perishes and is reborn as a lemur, the lowliest of the various devil forms. Mindless, shivering, and in constant physical agony, lemurs no longer retain even the merest hint of their mortal identities. End quote. Now, just a little side note, I'd like to point out that in that quote, it said that Chain Devils and Pain Devils, also known as Chitons and Excruciarchs, are the ones inflicting the torture. However, also in 3rd edition, on page 175 of the Book of Vile Darkness, it says, quote, "When the damned are sent to hell to face torment, it is often the insectoid Cornucons that perform the sick and terrible duties," end quote. So I guess the type of devil that does the torturing kind of depends. It seems that there's 3 different devils whose sole job is torturing. I don't really know why they need 3 different ones, but hey, they're devils. Their whole thing is being sadistic torturers, so it makes sense. Now, in 4th edition, I could not find any information on the actual process of going from a soul to a devil or being tortured or anything like that. There might be something I missed, and if there is, let me know in the comments. I didn't really spend a ton of time on 4th edition, just because frankly, there's not that much lore from that edition, and a lot of it was weird and changed a lot of things that didn't make a ton of sense. So, for right now, I got nothing on 4E. So for 5th edition, in the Monster Manual, it simply says that souls that arrive in hell are instantly turned into lemures, no torture necessary. But then, that begs the question, what is the point of the Chain Devils? See, the Chain Devils or Chitons are hell's torturers. Even in the Monster Manual for 5e, they're still described as sadistic jailers and torturers, torturing the lemures. But what reason is there to torture lemures? I mean, in 3rd edition, they had to torture souls to turn them into lemures. It was necessary in order to create more devils. Also, the torture created infernal energy that fueled Beator, which is the same energy that they use in order to promote devils. But in 5th edition, they're already devils when they arrive in hell, so they don't need to be tortured there, and 5e makes no mention of needing this weird torture soul juice for everything to work, so why do they torture them? The book doesn't explain why. I mean, maybe it's for fun, but that can't just be it. Hell is a lawful plane. Every devil has a job and a purpose that is required for everything to work. Their job can't be to have fun, so this leaves a lot of unanswered questions, something that 5th edition likes to do a lot. I feel like torture being a necessary part for the 9 hells to function makes a lot of sense, and I don't appreciate this vague, undetailed lore that 5th edition tends to have on most things. Now we move on to the Infernal Hierarchy, the ordering of the different types of devils, who's above who, what gets promoted to what, and within that, let's first talk about the process of promotion. Now, as we know, devils are lawful creatures, and they follow this strict hierarchy. If they impress their superiors, they get promoted. If they mess up, they can get demoted. In addition to impressing their superiors, in 2nd edition, they have the added lore of explaining that in order to promote to the next station, each devil must learn a lesson that is specific to their rank. Lemurs and Nuparibos have no lesson to learn and are promoted randomly based on necessity. Also, I'm pretty sure Nuparibos themselves can't actually be promoted. They must first be transformed into Lemurs in the case of 2nd edition, or demoted to Lemurs in the case of other editions, or in 5th edition, Nuparibos can't even be demoted or promoted. They're just kind of stuck like that forever, but we'll get onto them in a minute. So let's talk about the actual promotion process. What does being promoted actually entail? Well, in 1st edition, I couldn't find any descriptions of promotions. In 2nd edition, there is something called the Ministry of Promotion, which is overseen by the pit fiend Zabos, a member of the Dark Eight. It is devoted to observing devils and recording their performance, ensuring only the most competent, ambitious, strongest, and most intelligent make it to the top. No unready fiend is ever promoted, and they care more about not making mistakes than being exemplary. The promotion process is always a ritual done by other Batazu that inflicts agony on the individual being promoted. Quote, "The excruciation endured is in direct proportion to the speed of the promotion, and achieving each new rank involves suffering a different kind of pain." End quote. So here are some examples. A lemur chosen to become a Spinagon fights in a vast gladiatorial combat with others of its kind, striking down all comers until it's the only one left standing. The winner is then carted off and its skin peeled from its body, revealing the Spinagon that is formed inside the wax-like shell of the former lemur. An Abishai selected to become an Arenyes must submit to the tender ministrations of the Cornucons and the Knoll of Blades, who rearrange the features of the fiend to make it more pleasing to the mortals. They also carve another syllable into the fiend's spirit, making it a more complicated creature, more difficult to summon, and more cunning than ever before. An Oceloth promoted to the station of Amnizu undergoes the ritual racking, drawing, and quartering necessary for ascension. As each limb is yanked from the Oceloth's body, a smaller one emerges from the torso. When the assisting Oceloths peel off the bony face of the scorpion fiend, they leave behind a sticky caul on the new Amnizu's face. The Amnizu must remove the caul by force of will alone, or it will die before its promotion is complete. So each type of devil has a different, unique promotion process, and those three were listed as examples, but I couldn't find any more details on other ones. Other than the fact that a Gelugon being promoted to Pit Fiend must be tossed into the Pit of Flame, experiencing 1001 days of excruciating agony before being reborn as a Pit Fiend. The length of time a Batizu must stay at its current rank before promotion depends on the fiend's current station, its ability to shed undesirable elements in its spirit, and the reports of its superiors. No matter how well a devil performs, it must serve in a station for at least a century before moving on. Sometimes a Batizu must remain in a station for a set period, with time added for poor performance, as in the case with Ice Devils. They must go 777 years of not making a single mistake, and the second they do make a mistake, that's 777 years gets reset. Even if they make it that entire time, only 1,000 Ice Devils get promoted per century, so you might not even be one of the ones selected for that. In 3rd edition, it says that inside each devil, there is a mushy tissue called the ovatorium, which is filled with dozens of tiny sacs containing finger-sized fetal versions of various devils. When promoted, a ritual is done. This ritual lasts 1 hour per rank that the devil it's being promoted into is. So on the 3rd edition chart, a imp is a rank 5, so being promoted from a bearded devil to an imp would take 5 hours. When a devil is promoted, quote, a sac corresponding to the new form swells with infernal energy until it reaches full size and bursts through the ruined flesh of the old form, end quote. Obviously, this process is also super painful. In 4th edition, I could find nothing on the lore of promotion. In 5th edition, the Monster Manual simply says promotion, quote, invokes a brief, painful transformation, end quote. However, in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, it is said that devils in line for promotion or demotion are made susceptible to the fires of Phlegethos and go through a special ritual in them. If being demoted, the flames bring them searing agony, and if being promoted, it brings them ecstatic joy. So 5th edition contradicts itself, saying that in the Monster Manual that being promoted is painful but brief, whereas in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes it says that it's a whole ritual and it's actually very pleasant and feels good to them. Which is strange, but this is not the only time that 5th edition contradicts itself, as we will get to when we discuss Zariel. Now we move on to the actual ordering of the devils. The hierarchy follows the rule of threes, which is a thing introduced in Planescape, saying that everything in the multiverse follows this rule of threes. If you see 2 things, look for the 3rd. How the 9 Hells follows this is so. It is 9 layers, which is 3 times 3. It has 3 casts: Least Devils, Lesser Devils, and Greater Devils. And then it has 3 rankings of powers: Ordinary Devils, which are those 3 casts we just discussed, Nobles, and then the Lords of the Nine, or Archdukes. So, we move on to Ordinary Devils. The lowest of the low are the Least Devils, and the bottom of these are the Lemures. When a soul is first turned into a Batizu, this is normally what they are turned into. This is consistent within all editions. Lemures are always the bottom of the barrel. Now the next highest, and surprisingly enough is actually higher than a Lemur in status, is the Nuparibos. Now in 5th edition, Nuparibos are formed from the souls of people who are evil out of laziness and lack ambition. Lemurs will never be promoted to a Nuparibo, and Nuparibos will never be promoted to anything else. They are their own devil, cut off from everything else, but still above Lemurs in status, interestingly enough. In 3rd edition, Nuparibos are formed from the devils that failed their master and were unable to perform a task adequately. They then go through a horrific transformation surgery at the hands of pain devils until their eyes and mouth are sewed shut and their brains are removed from their nostrils. It is possible for a Nuparibo to regain its status, but it is rare. In 2nd edition, Nuparibos are formed when a devil is slain outside the 9 Hells. It does say that they can rank back up, but page 16 of Faces of Evil the Fiends seems to imply that they must first be demoted to Lemur before working up the chain of command. On page 12 of the same book, it says that Nuparibos aren't actually true devils, that originally Beator was inhabited by another race, and that they had larvae that came from the plane itself, not from mortals, because at the time, mortals didn't exist yet. These larvae naturally turned into Nuparibos. Some scholars believe the reason slain Batazu turn into them is because they are simply going back to the original form the energy of the plane intends them to be. They must be forcefully transformed back into lemurs in order to rank up to Batazu. In 1st edition, Nuparibos are the remains of all lawful evil creatures not sufficiently malignant to be changed into lemurs, which is basically what they are in 5th edition. So one of the first instances of a lore change in 5th edition not just being a straight retcon for no reason, but actually just going back to the original lore from 1st edition. Now, the next in the ranking of the least devils is the Spine Devils, also known as the Spinigons. These are only considered least devils in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd edition. In 5th edition, they are lesser devils, and in 4th edition, it's a little unclear, but I'm pretty sure they are also considered lesser devils. And while they are least devils, they are the highest of the least devils, and they are the first devil to get its own lesson it must learn in order to promote in 2nd edition. Now we move on to lesser devils. Now, 1st edition has mentions of greater and lesser devils in individual stat blocks, but there's no table that lists the exact ordering, so I don't really have much to say on 1st edition's hierarchy ordering since I couldn't find a specific one. Now, in 2nd edition, this is where things get confusing. So, the lowest of the lesser devils are the Abishai. Now, in 3rd edition, Abishai existed outside of the normal hierarchy. They were still promoted from a lemur to a white Abishai, and then the white could be promoted to black, then green, blue, and finally red. And then a red can be promoted to a chain devil and continued the standard promotion path, but in reality, they almost never deviate from the Abishai hierarchy. So they're sort of separate in their own way, but technically still a part of it. And then in 5th edition, a soul that worshipped Tiamat is automatically turned into an Abishai upon death, apparently skipping being a lemur as far as I could tell from reading. And it makes no mention of them starting off as a certain color and working their way up, and it also doesn't mention being promoted to other types of Batazu. So in 5th edition, they seem to exist completely outside of the Infernal hierarchy. But in 2nd edition, they are the lowest of the lesser devils. They are promoted from Spinigons, since Spinigons are least devils in 2nd edition. Spine devils only get promoted to Abishai if they lack ambition and cunning. Now, as you can see from these arrows, they can skip these if they perform exceptionally well, but most of the time, they're getting turned into a Abishai or a Barbatsu. After Abishai, they can be promoted to either a Barbatsu or a Cornugon. Now, the Cornugon and the Barbatsu are the same rank. They are at the exact same position in the Infernal hierarchy. These are just alternate paths that promotion can take in 2nd edition. Now, I couldn't actually find a reason as to why there's two paths. 2nd edition, as cool and intricate as the lore is, had a tendency to be a little overcomplicated in my opinion. Now, after the Barbatsu, also known as a bearded devil, it then goes to Bone Devil, then Barb Devil, which is the highest ranked of the lesser devils. Now, if you take the alternate path, then after Cornugon, you would be promoted to an Arenes. And being promoted to an Arenes is seen as a reward for Batazu who have overcome their initial sluggishness, for those who have had to suffer through the ranks to prove their worth. And then from Arenes, they can be promoted to any devil, including greater devils, but normally they would go straight to Bone Devil. Now, in 3rd edition... So 3rd edition's hierarchy table is a jumbled mess. It's inconsistent with other editions, which is to be expected because lore changes between editions. That's the entire point of this video series. However, in addition to being drastically different from the other editions, it's also inconsistent with itself. This Forgotten Realms wiki note explains it better than me, but essentially it's kind of a useless resource because it just can't even be self-consistent. So for the purposes of this video, I'm basically gonna completely ignore it, except for occasionally mentioning stuff from 3rd edition. Now, I would like to make a side note. In 2nd edition, the Cornugon is promoted to Arenes. However, in 3rd edition, it says that devils are never promoted to Arenes status, that Arenes are only created by being born to another Arenes, the original ones being fallen angels. They are the only devils that are born in the 9 hells, as opposed to being created from the soul of mortals. Arenes themselves can be promoted or demoted, however, they tend to resist promotion so that they can keep their ability to become pregnant and give birth. Now, 4th edition has no hierarchy table, however, I can extrapolate their rank by looking at their levels. And it doesn't have any mentions of lesser or greater, but based on their descriptions, we can assume ice and up are greater, and that the rest of these are lesser. So at level 3, you have an Imp, then from Imp, it goes to Spine Devil, then you have a Legion Devil, Devil also at level 6, but the Legion Devil has 4 different forms that are all different levels. So since Legion Devils are considered the basic foot soldier of the 9 Hells, I assume that these are like the people in charge of squads, companies, legions, etc. But I don't know if the level 21 Legionnaire is above the level 17 Bone Devil, or if it's on the same level as the rest of the Legion Devils. 4th edition's not very detailed or really explains any of this. Also, just a small nitpick, I'd like to point out that the term Legionnaire is from Latin, and in Rome, Legionnaires were just the regular foot soldiers that made up a legion. They were not the ones leading the legions. So using this term to describe the highest level one is kind of weird and inconsistent, but whatever, it's a fantasy game. I'm not going to critique their use of words. After that, you had a Succubus at level 9. Now, I'd like to point out that the Succubus is new here. They weren't mentioned in the past 3 editions hierarchies. That's because they weren't devils. They were chaotic evil demons from the Abyss in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd edition. In 4th edition, they became lawful evil devils, and then in 5th edition, they became neutral evil, generic fiends that work for whoever they want to work for. Now, the meta reason that Succubi were changed into devils in 4th edition is just because they wanted demons to all be monstrous creatures, and they wanted devils to be more humanoid, and since Succubi look very human-y, just with like wings and claws and stuff, they wanted to classify them as humanoids, so they had to turn them into devils. There is an in-universe explanation, sort of. See, the Forgotten Realms tries to come up with these explanations for lore changes in order to make the world feel consistent. However, the 4th edition cosmology was so drastically different, they kind of had a hard time. So there is mention in 2 novels that they switched sides when Asmodeus became a god and started working for the devils, but I couldn't really find a good reason as to why they did it. It doesn't really make any sense to me, but hey, the writers were just working with what they had. 4th edition changed a lot of lore, and they were trying their best to reconcile that. And then I couldn't find any reason as to why they stopped working for devils and became neutral evil fiends in 5th edition. I say stopped working for devils. Some of them still work for devils, but some work for demons, some work for whoever they want. I mean, they're neutral. They just work for whoever they want on the lower planes. I imagine plenty work for themselves too. After Succubus in 4th edition, you had the Chain Devil. Now, the Chain Devil was not mentioned in the 2nd edition hierarchy. They do exist in 2nd edition, but they are only found in the city Jangling Hyter and Minoros. So I guess they sort of exist outside the hierarchy. After Chain Devil, you have Bearded Devil, which Bearded Devils sort of fill the same niche as Legion Devils, being foot soldiers. I guess in 4th edition, they upgraded them to like bodyguards and shock troopers, but I don't know, Legion Devil seems like a completely unnecessary addition. And after Bearded Devil, you have Bone Devil as the highest of the lesser devils in 4th edition. On to 5th edition, and things get a lot simpler. You have Imps at the lowest, just like 4th edition. In 1st and 2nd edition, Imps are not mentioned in the hierarchy. They are said to be lawful evil fiends that serve as familiars to lawful evil wizards. And in 1st edition, they are described as a very minor devil. But in 2nd edition, they just say they're the errand boys of the powerful evil beings who commanded the darkest planes. But there's no mention of them officially existing within the Infernal hierarchy or even originating from the 9 Hells. So I'm not quite sure if Imps are devils or not in 1st and 2nd edition, but I know in 3rd and after, they are devils. So, 5th edition, Imps are the lowest. After that, you have Spine Devils, which in the first 3 editions were lower on the hierarchy and were least devils, but in this one and 4th, they are lesser devils. Then after Spine Devils, you have Bearded Devil, Barbed Devil, Chain Devil, and then Bone Devil. Now on to Greater Devils. So in 5th and 2nd edition, Horned Devils are both the lowest of the Greater Devils. In 2nd edition, Amnizus are higher than the Horned Devil and lower than the Ice Devil, but they can't actually be promoted from Amnizu to Ice Devil, or they can't be promoted at all as an Amnizu. The only way for them to advance is to first be demoted to a Horned Devil and then work their way up. Now, I have no idea why it's this convoluted. However, I would like to point out that in 2nd edition, every rank had a lesson that they needed to learn in order to be promoted to the next rank. And Amnizu did have a lesson they needed to learn, but they can't get promoted, so I don't actually know what the point of that is. I couldn't find any explanation to this. From Horned Devil, they get promoted to Ice Devil, and then from Ice Devil, they get promoted to Pit Fiend. In 4th edition, Greater Devils, you have Ice Devil, then you have the War Devil, also called a Malebranch. Now, in 3rd edition, War Devil and Horned Devil were 2 different creatures, Horned Devils being called Cornugons, and War Devils being called Malebranch. However, they were very similar. And then in 4th edition, it doesn't even have the Horned Devil, it just has the War Devil. And then in 5th edition, they have Horned Devils, but their other name isn't Cornugon, it's Malebranch, like the War Devil is. So I kind of get the idea that these are the same thing, or they were just merged in 5th edition. However, technically in 3rd edition, they were 2 separate devils, so it's a little unclear. After that, you had a Storm Devil, and then you had a Pit Fiend. There are other 4th edition devils I'm not mentioning, but I was just ticking ones from the monster manual. The 4th edition has the least amount of lore for any edition, so I wasn't going to get too detailed into it. And then in 5th edition, it's basically the same as 2nd edition, except with the introduction of the Erinyes. So Horn Devil, Erinyes, Ice Devil, Pit Fiend. The Erinyes was a lesser devil in some of the older editions, but it got promoted to Greater Devil in 5th edition. And then the Amnesu are also in 5th edition, but this hierarchy table is from the monster manual, and the Amnesu wasn't introduced until Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, so it wasn't given an official place in the hierarchy. However, using challenge rating, we can extrapolate that it would have been above Ice Devil and below Pit Fiend. Now, whether or not you can be promoted from an Ice Devil to an Amnesu or an Amnesu to a Pit Fiend, it's unclear. I would assume it works the way in 2nd edition where they can't be, but I have no idea. 5th edition doesn't say. Now, as we know, Greater Devils are better than Lesser Devils and etc. And within the Greater Devils, the Pit Fiends are the highest. However, not all devils of the same station are of equal standing. Some have positions with more responsibility, such as a Gelugon that is the general of a legion comprised of other Gelugons. With Pit Fiends, the highest of all of them are the Dark Eight. The Dark Eight are the Pit Fiends that are above all other ordinary devils, including other Pit Fiends. They are the generals that run the blood war for Asmodeus. Although they sit below the Lords of the Nine, the Lords are not in charge of the blood war. They only govern their lair. So the Dark Eight are the ones managing the logistics, making decisions, and marching armies through the lower planes. Unless Asmodeus commands something contrary, the Dark Eight are the ones making all of the military decisions of the Batazu. In addition to being the highest ranked generals, each member is in charge of a different ministry of Batazu culture. Now, there are a couple other devil types you might think I missed. These are ones that were never put on a hierarchy list that I could tell, and I intentionally skipped. They probably do have a rank within the hierarchy. There are going to be devils that are beneath them and less important, and devils that are more important, but they're not something that a devil will be promoted to most of the time. What I mean is that they normally have a specific prerequisite, such as a Maragon has to be a fallen soldier or mercenary, a Narzugon has to be a paladin who made a deal with a devil. So these aren't things that your average Lemure being promoted all the way to Pit Fiend will ever be in the form of. So the hierarchy that I was discussing is mainly just the things that everyone has to go through, or most likely will go through at some point in their promotion path. Now, one more thing that I also didn't mention that I need to address is the Rakshasa. So, the Rakshasa are lawful evil fiends, just like devils, but they're not actually devils. I mean, sure, a lot of them live in hell and work for devils. Plenty of Rakshasa dukes reside in estates in Dis, and the Rakshasa Mahadi operates in Avernus directly for Asmodeus himself, but they aren't true Batazu. They might be related to them. Some people believe they are the result of experimentation done by Batazu a long time ago, and others think they are a result of the union between fiendish animals and devils. Others think that Arcanelos were originally demons that were exiled, and Rakshasas are descendants of them, but no one really knows where they come from. We do know that they are not devils. Now, after the Greater Devils, we have the Nobles. The Nobility of Beator are the stepping stones between Pit Fiend and the Lords of the Nine. If a lord believes a Pit Fiend has served Beator exceptionally well, and that lord trusts them, they will shape them to a new form. These are called Archdevils or Unique Devils, powerful devils with a form unique to only them, unlike the ordinary devils. They are the dukes, viziers, viscounts, and other powerful devils that serve under the Lords of the Nine, ruling smaller parts of the lair they dwell in. Now, the Lords of the Nine are also types of unique devils, with the exception of Bel. They're just more powerful ones. Now, above the nobility are, you guessed it, the Lords of the Nine. There are 9 lords, obviously, also known as Archdukes, one ruling each lair. The one who rules the 9th lair is Asmodeus, ruler of all the hells. The other 8 lords owe fealty to him, and he is the only devil in all of Beator that doesn't covet a promotion. The lords hate each other because they are all power-hungry fiends that crave promotions, and these other 7 lords are all on their way to overthrow Asmodeus. Being lawful creatures, though, they understand the need for diplomacy and alliances now and again to keep Beator strong against outsiders. One other thing is that the lords don't care about the blood war. They leave that to the Dark Eight. They simply rule their lair and keep order within it. The one exception to this is Zariel, a fallen angel who wants to wipe out demons from the multiverse. Now I will go over who lords over which layer of hell and the changes throughout the editions. Now, most of these changes, with the exception of one, do have in-universe, like, canonical explanations as to why these changed, which I always think is really interesting when they explain these changes. It sort of adds lore to the world, it makes you more immersed. Nothing takes you out of a game like a retcon. Most of this in-universe explanations have to do with the Reckoning, so let me just real quick give a brief explanation of what the Reckoning is. The Reckoning was a civil war in Beator. Basically, there were two main factions. Beelzebul led one, allied with Moloch, Belial, and Zariel. Mephistopheles led the other, allied with Despater, Mammon, and Geryon. Both sides wanted to kill Asmodeus and take the throne, but believed they needed to wipe out the other side to gain enough power to do so. I'm not going to get too detailed about it, but if you want to know more, check out Guide to Hell, page 37. But basically, Geryon stayed loyal to Asmodeus. He had infiltrated the ranks of both armies, getting pit fiends to stay loyal to the Lord of the Nine, and blew his horn during a climactic point during a battle on Malebranch. At this point, all the pit fiends still loyal to Asmodeus turned on their masters and overthrew them. Now, Asmodeus kept most of these Archdukes in charge, figuring he'd rather have an enemy he knows ruling a layer than an enemy he didn't. However, he had some exceptions. So let's start off with the first layer of hell, Avernus. The Lord of Avernus is Bel in all editions except 5th, where it is Zariel. So this part's a little weird. Bel's lore is that he was a pit fiend that was able to overthrow the previous Lord of Avernus and take over. Side note here, he skipped the process of becoming a noble and a unique devil. So even as the Lord of Avernus, he still stayed in pit fiend form, which is kind of badass. In the 2nd edition book Guide to Hell, the previous ruler is said to be Zariel, the one that he overthrew. Also, Zariel, as mentioned previously, was a part of the Reckoning. Now, no date is given on when the Reckoning happened other than in the early days of the Blood War, but the Blood War has been going on since the beginning of time, so that's a long-ass time ago. This idea is even supported in the 5th edition adventure Rise at Tiamat, where it says Asmodeus had, quote, reinstated the fallen angel Zariel as the Archduchess of Avernus, reversing an earlier decision that allowed a pit fiend named Bel to take the throne, end quote. So this 5th edition module is consistent with the lore that Zariel had been there a long time and had ruled hell before Bel. However, in the 5th edition module Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus, it completely retcons this. It says that Zariel had been an angel that wanted to fight against evil in the Blood War, but the gods wouldn't let her. So she took it upon herself to recruit mortals and go to hell herself with this army, only to ultimately lose, become imprisoned by Asmodeus, and eventually convinced to be a devil. Now, the whole fallen angel stuff is consistent with older lore, just expanded upon, which I have no problem with. What isn't consistent is the timeline. It said that she led this march in 1354 DR being the main calendar used in the Forgotten Realms, which takes place only about 140 years before 5th edition and only about 3 years before 1st edition. So if the Reckoning lore from 2nd edition is true, she had to have been a devil for tens if not hundreds of thousands of years, but Descent into Avernus and Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes says she's only been one for a little over a century. So not only is this a retcon of lore from older editions, but it's even a retcon of lore established in another 5th edition module, which is just fucking crazy to me, but that's 5th edition for you. Now, the 2nd layer of Dis is ruled by Despater in all editions. The 3rd layer of Mineros is ruled by Mammon in all editions. The 4th layer of Phlegothos in 1st edition is ruled by Belial, but in all other editions, it is co-ruled by Belial and his daughter Lady Firna. The 5th layer of Stygia is ruled by Geryon in 1st edition and Levistus in all others. During the Reckoning, Geryon was the only lord that stayed loyal to Asmodeus, but Asmodeus demoted him for reasons no one knows. The 6th layer of Malebranch is ruled by Moloch in 1st edition. It was originally controlled by Beelzebul in the history, but he gifted it to Moloch. After the Reckoning, he was exiled, and the hag Countess Malagard was put in charge in 2nd edition. In 3rd edition, the Hag Countess was transformed into the new terrain of Malebranch. Her ribcage became mountains, her skull became a fortress, her fingers became white towers, etc. And Asmodeus' daughter, Glazia, was put in charge of the 6th layer of hell. And she has stayed the Lord of Malebranch up to this day throughout 4th and 5th edition. The 7th layer, Malodomini, is ruled by Beelzebul in all editions. Cania is ruled by Mephistopheles in all editions, and Nessus, the lowest layer, is ruled by Asmodeus in all editions. Now, there are other beings that have ruled different layers of hell if you go back far enough in history, but I'm just listing the ones that were the current rulers during the different editions of D&D. Now, I will get more in depth of the history, lore, and characteristics of each layer, archdevil, and devil type in later videos, so stay tuned for those. This is how the infernal hierarchy of the 9 hells of Beator works, all explanations and lore I could find throughout all 5 editions of Dungeons & Dragons. If there are things I got wrong or things I missed or overlooked, please let me know in the comments. I want to be more educated. Thank you for watching and see you next time on Dungeons & Dragons Lore Through the Editions.